RP Singh, of course, he's the leading light of our alumni association, so please welcome him.
Good morning, everyone. I think many of you have probably heard of Haque and his successes. He's been in the valley for a number of years. Need the mic? Oh, okay. I'm loud enough? All right. So Pramod has had a great career. He's worked in corporate world, and then he went and became a VC. He's kind of one of the most well-known VCs. He's created over, I think, $40 billion worth of returns in the business. So many of us already know him, so I don't think he needs any introduction. So Pramod, thanks for coming over. I think you were kind enough to help us start this movement about 7 years ago in Vegas when we did the first reunion, and now we are on to the sixth one, so thank you very much. Is it working? Yeah. So I think, a lot of people are kind of curious about learning about your journey from Delhi to here, and so maybe if you can kind of walk them through a little bit, that would be great as a start.
Okay, all right, let me go through it quickly. So, I graduated in '69, a long time ago, with a bachelor's in electrical engineering, and I began to look for a job, and in a miraculous way, God led me to a very interesting company, Siemens Medical. They were based in Mumbai. Well, they're based in Germany, but they had a division or a subsidiary in Mumbai, but they also had an office in Delhi. So I took that job, and I was recruited as a sales engineer. And so I had to learn, back in those days, they were selling X-ray equipment, that's all they had. And so I learned to be a sales engineer for a year, and then at the end of that first year, they promoted me to be a salesperson. And I had territory in Rajasthan, part of Uttar Pradesh, and obviously Delhi. And so I did that for about 3 years, and 2 more years after that. So in '72, so what was happening in '71 was that a lot of my colleagues from Delhi College of Engineering at that time were coming to the US for further studies. And so I decided that I would like to do that too. And I only applied to one university. I won't go into the details of why, but I applied to Northwestern University in Chicago. And I got selected to come to do my master's in electrical engineering. And I just talk about this, it's sort of miraculous how God orchestrated things. My advisor happened to be a gentleman, from the US who had worked for General Electric Medical Systems. And so the joke was the 2 competitors have come together and now they're collaborating. So I did my master's, and then he asked me at the end of that year, hey, do you want to do a PhD? And I said, sir, I would like to, but I don't have any money, I can't afford it. And he said, don't worry about it. I like you, and I'll get you a scholarship, and I'll get you a research assistantship, because he had a grant from the National Institute of Health. And we began to work then on a very interesting project, which was, when you have X-rays that hit certain compounds, they emit light. And so the project was, okay, how can you come up with the right kinds of compounds so that you get a lot of light coming out of them? It was sort of a strange project, but that's what I worked on. I got my PhD in sometime in, I think it was 76, yeah, about 4 years later. And then I began to look for a job, and in a miraculous way, I found a job in Chicago itself, actually northwest of Chicago, a place called Northbrook, Illinois. And there was a company there called EMI. EMI was a British company, and they were at that time known for music, and they still exist, EMI Music. They were the ones that pioneered the Beatles and so on. But they had, believe it or not, they had invented the CT scanner. And there was a fellow by the name of Godfrey Hounsfield, and I won't go into the details, but he had come up with this idea, and he had built the first head scanner. And back in those days, scanners were using what's called photomultiplier tubes. Most people don't know what they are, but these are tubes, and they have 2 electrodes, and then a wire, and then an X-ray beam would hit that wire, electricity would come out, and then depending on how much electricity came, depending on how much light came, they would be able to detect how much, sort of attenuation was happening. So they decided in a miraculous way that, hey, we need to now build a whole body scanner, because a lot of radiologists are asking for a whole body scanner. So for some reason, and I think the reason was that a lot of the early customers were in the US, they decided to come to the US and open this branch, product development, and I got hired as a product development manager. And so they came to me, I still remember that, saying, hey Pramod, we need to now go find photomultiplier tubes, because the resolution was dependent on the tube. The detection system determines the resolution, and in the body, there's a lot of moving parts, very, very small arteries and so on. They said, hey, we need 1/8 of an inch resolution. Go find a photomultiplier tube that's an 1/8 of an inch. And I said, there's no way you can get an 1/8 of an inch photomultiplier tube with 2 electrodes and a wire. I said, no, go talk to people. So I talked to Toshiba and a couple of other entities. Couldn't find anyone. They would all laugh and said, what are you talking about? 1/8 of an inch. So then I had an idea. Because of the work that I had done with my PhD, I said, sir, my boss, I think we can use photosensors and photodiodes. And they all started to laugh, especially the guys from the UK. What is he talking about? Yeah, an idiot. And I said, well, listen, give me a little budget. So they gave me a budget, and I was based in Chicago, and I started to come to Silicon Valley. And you won't believe what Silicon Valley looked like in 1976. Barren. They were only, they were starting to grow. There were 2 entities here, Fairchild Semiconductor and National Semiconductor. That's where the name Silicon Valley comes from. And so I came to them, and they basically said, no, Pramod, we do work for the US government. We got $1 million contracts. Your 100K is not going to do anything for us. But why don't you go to a company we will show you in Santa Monica that does that has a foundry where they make silicon, and we use it when we do research because we can't get into the foundry here. So I would, go there as well. So anyway, I was able to get the first whole body scanner built in 1976 or so, 77 or so. And I still remember traveling to Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic, and it was a fascinating time. Back in those days, scanners were selling for $1.5 million. This is back in the 77 time frame. So only very, very large hospitals could buy them. So a friend of mine at work, it was in the marketing side, we were working together, and he told me one day, Pramod, hey, you're doing a lot of good work on the product development side. You should do some stuff in marketing and all. And so I enrolled at Northwestern Kellogg School of Management, where I now serve on the advisory board. And so I'm working full time, and I went into the evening program and started my MBA program. And so I did my MBA there as well. In the meantime, our company is now, this EMI company, is now getting sold to Toshiba. Toshiba is buying it. And so this same friend of mine says to me, Pramod, these scanners are so expensive. I have an idea, and he was originally from Orange County, that hey, we can build a low-cost scanner. That is when Microsoft had taken off and microprocessors were getting developed. So these were very, very smaller devices rather than these big, large computers. And so I moved. I just got married, moved to Orange County, and we started a small development company. And we built the first whole body scanner using microprocessors, and we could sell that now for $500K, so that even smaller hospitals could buy it. And all of this was, it wasn't medical oriented, it was all technology oriented. And so then our company got sold, and I began to look for a job. And in a miraculous way, God led me to Minnesota. So I traveled all the way from Orange County to Minnesota, Minneapolis, and I was CEO of a startup there. And this startup was a fascinating startup back in those days. CT scans were planar slices. And so, they were nice slices. But this company had come up with a methodology to take planar slices and create a 3D image. And you could rotate it and look at it and so on, so surgeons can decide, what kind of surgery am I going to do. So for about 5 years or so, I was CEO of this company. And a lot of experience, in a startup now, 2 startups, almost 3, because the first one in EMI was almost like a technical division, but it was a startup. And so my company eventually got sold, and I began to figure out what do I do next. And in a miraculous way then, I ran into Norwest Venture Capital. We used to call Norwest Venture Capital back then. The name now changed to Norwest Venture Partners. And they had looked at my company, and when we were raising funds for this 3D imaging company, and they had not invested in it because they didn't quite understand the technology, because they were doing a lot of consumer-oriented stuff. They were investors in Dairy Queen, investors in all kinds of mattress companies and so on. So they had no interest in technology. But then what happened is later on, they started to do a little bit of tech stuff. And they came to me one day after I had sold this company and I was doing some consulting. They said, hey, we need some help with technical due diligence. Can you help us? And I said, okay. And so I started to do some consulting for them, due diligence and tech companies as they were looking at those. And at the end of 1 year of consulting, then they said, hey, can you join us full time? So in 1990, I joined them full time. And so I've now been with the firm now for this September it'll be 35 years. And then 1 year of consulting back in '89. So so all that experience in startups and so on and technology stuff led me into the venture capital business. Began to do a lot of investments. I did some companies in Minneapolis, but then as you know, in 92, 93, there was a lot of companies getting started here. Cisco had started, Sun Microsystems, which doesn't exist today, was there. Oracle was growing rapidly. And so a lot of tech companies were getting started here in the Bay Area. So I was doing a lot of travel back and forth from Minneapolis to the Bay Area. And a friend of mine from Seattle had invested in a company called PeopleSoft. And he moved here. And then, at some point, sometime in '94 or so, I said, I think I should move to the Bay Area too. So in '95, I moved here. So I've been here now for about 30 years. So our firm has grown dramatically. We do a lot of investments in the tech space, but also in the consumer space. We do a lot of healthcare stuff, pharmaceutical companies, med tech companies, e-commerce. We do venture, early stage startups. We also do late stage venture, and then we also have a growth equity team. So we invest in companies that are EBITDA positive. And the firm has grown dramatically. When I first started, it was a $200 million firm, and now, we're a $3 billion firm. Every 3 years, we raise a new fund, and we have about $15 billion under assets under management. So we have about 280 companies in our portfolio. I can't even remember the names. It's so difficult to remember the names. So anyway, that's how I got into the venture business.
So I think it's a very interesting journey. So Pramod, a couple of questions come to mind. You talked about your background is in medtech, but I don't think you've done a lot of medtech startups. So at least we know you as an enterprise SaaS company.
Yeah. So this company these 3 companies that I worked for, they were really not medtech companies. I mean, even though they were producing something that was used in the medical industry, but a lot of the work that I was doing was all computer sensitive, right? I mean, creating, software, how do you do this, so a lot of it was tech oriented, and IT and computer science oriented.
Now, there is a trend these days that people say, you leave college and go directly into doing a startup, and you obviously went the traditional route where you worked someplace, got the experience, and then did it. So, in terms of your advice between these 2 things, and you've seen it all, I'm sure, what do you think is the right thing in today's market?
All right, so that's a very good question. So it has different implications for different folks. So typically, let's say when we hire people into our firm, We hire them at different levels, so we hire a lot of associates and so on, but then we also sometimes hire partners, investment managers, principals and so on. So as far as principals and investment partners are concerned, we're always looking for people that have had a lot of operating background and also some aspects of startups. So they understand what startups go through, because that's what we're investing in. Now, the growth equity team is a little different. These are companies that are already stable, they've got EBITDA positive, they're growing. And so those partners are a little different. We hire them, they have a lot of expertise in financial analysis, looking at models, business models, understanding business models, understanding, what EBITDA is and depreciation and this and that, how can this company grow and so on. But on startups, it's a very different game. On our venture side, all the partners that we hire, they've had a lot of operating experience. And because they've had operating experience, and also in startups, not just big companies, startups, they understand the kinds of issues that startups face. Now, in terms of entrepreneurs, now again, on the associate side and so on, the younger jobs, so to speak, there we're looking for people that can do due diligence, that understand a little bit of technology and also financial modeling and so on. But when it comes to investing in companies, we're always looking at people, even if it's a startup, we're not interested in investing in someone that is just coming out of college and wants to do a startup. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't work. There are firms that do that, right? But in our firm, we're always investing in founders that have actually been in a couple of startups before. They've made some mistakes. They've learned from those mistakes, and they understand the domain, the area that they're focused on. And so those are people that we get interested in investing in. And so it varies. Now there are firms out there that will invest in founders coming out of startups, out of college and so on. And when you look at some of the large companies here in the Bay Area, there were people coming out of college. When you look at Stanford, right? Sergey Brin and Larry Page came out of Stanford, and they had this idea, and they started Google. Right? And you think of Microsoft, Bill Gates never even finished his college degree, had an idea, and he started. Same thing with Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Meta now. He came out of college, was at Stanford, and Excel, sort of he had an idea and so on. But then what we find is, with the exception of some of these large companies that have been successful, there's hundreds of companies where, people fund these companies and they go out of business, they don't make it. So, we're always very careful what we invest in. We're looking for founders that have experience, and we're looking for, investors or people that have a lot of operating experience as we hire them into our firm.
So, Pramod, I remember I think it was almost 20 years ago, we went to India together.
Yeah.
And you were giving a talk to the folks there in Thai, talking about how they should adopt entrepreneurship and so on, and what it will take. And obviously the culture was very different at that time. And now the entrepreneurship bug has sort of come in full stream in India as well. So what is your advice to entrepreneurs both here and in India who are kind of getting on this journey? Like, what are, the current technology climate and everything moving really, really fast. And I think we all have the memories of .com bust, and people say maybe we are heading to AI bust. So what is your advice to entrepreneurs who are getting on this journey now?
Yeah, so, like I said, there's always ideas that people come up with. We went through the .com boom, as you pointed out. There's a little bit of overhype on AI right now, and I'm not saying that AI is not good. AI has got a lot of applications. I tell people when you look at AI, you go back a few years, you go back, almost 20 years. Data analytics was something that was, being used dramatically, right? I mean, there's all kinds of companies we funded over the years in data analytics, but that was all structured data. And now, what's happening is with AI, you can also take unstructured data in all kinds of language modules and so on and so forth. And you can supplement data analytics, structured data with unstructured data, and you can get a lot more information and a lot of new perspectives that you couldn't get with data, pure simple data analytics or structured data. So I think what you'll see is I think there's a little bit of overhype, but what we're seeing right now is that a lot of our existing companies that have applications and are using data analytics now are starting to also take unstructured data and put it there and use that and refine their models and so on. So I think there's a little bit of overhype, but I think AI as we know it today of unstructured data is something that will be used tremendously. I think a lot of applications, existing applications, new applications get developed, and AI will be a tool that will get used.
Okay, so I think since we are running a little bit late, I'm going to ask you for your parting comments and how do you think, how can DTU, because our Vice Chancellor is here, he would probably like to know how can you work with you and all the other successful entrepreneurs here to make the university even better?
So how
can all of us as alums help the university even in a bigger way?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is, to sort of, talk to, students, encourage them to, when they graduate, you can have some new ideas and so on, entrepreneurship, you can try that. But, I tell a lot of my friends and so on that, hey, go into a startup somewhere, get learn some stuff, and then, take your idea and start a company. But now you worked a little bit with startups, and so you'll have, a lot more insight as to what it takes to get a startup growing. One of the things, for example, I tell people, and I think Paul, you and I talked about, one of the lessons that I've learned either from the good things that have happened or even the bad things that have happened. And again, I'm not trying to discriminate in any way, but one of the worst deals that I've ever done, where our firm lost our money and it affected me as well. We lost about $55 million in a deal that we'd invested in. I won't name any names. But one of the challenges we ran into was the startup was led by some entrepreneurs that had some good perspective. And there was also a gentleman who was one of the co-founders who had done some startup before and had come from IBM and so on. Later on, his company was acquired by IBM. So he had some good insights. But then one of the big mistakes we made was that as the company was growing, they're still losing money, startups. We put some board members, we had one board member that came from IBM, and the challenge we ran into was that even though he had a lot of insight into technology, he had never been in a startup before. And so one of the things that happened then was that as the company was growing, we felt that the existing founder was not the right CEO to scale the business. So in spite of my protest, because I was just one board member there were multiple other board members, they hired an executive that had been at IBM, and they took him out of IBM and made him CEO. Now he's got nothing against IBM. But the problem was that this gentleman had no idea how startups function. And so, he'd come in and, we need to hire a senior VP of sales, and then we need to have multiple VPs of sales, and then, we'll have all. And so the challenge was that the company started to burn money like you won't believe it. Because, when you come from very, very large companies, you have no idea how startups function, right? And so, you have no idea what to do, how to do it, how to scale the business. You've got this idea of how large companies function and the management team and the bureaucracy that exists there. And the company eventually went out of business because they were losing so much money. No one would fund them. We went out to raise money, and all the investors would laugh and say, come on, the company's losing so much money, and look, your CEO, and he's got no experience in startups. Not interested, not interested, not interested. And so those are the challenges that, startups face. Having operating experience and having experience in a startup is very essential. I remember, one of the first investments not the first, the second or third investment I made when I was in Minneapolis, and I just joined the firm. So I was like 2 years into investing. I came across an interesting company which was based in Austin, Texas at that time. And I got very interested in the company, and I, flew back and forth, and eventually I submitted a term sheet. And so what happened was that, we negotiated a little bit on the term sheet, and then finally I won the deal, and my firm invested, and I was on the board now. And I remember going to the board meeting, and the CEO of the board introducing me to the other partners that were on the board. There was one from Sequoia, and there was one from Matrix. And then he tells me in a very interesting way in the first board meeting, Pramod, we're glad to have you here. And then he says, Pramod, want you to know that there were multiple people that submitted term sheets, and your term sheet was not the highest valuation. There were other term sheets and other investors that were willing to pay us more. But we chose you. And so I'm sort of, what's he telling me? What does that mean? And then he looks at me and he says, Pramod, why we decided to go with you rather than a higher valuation? And no, what? He said, Pramod, we're a startup, and you've been in 2 or 3 startups. You will understand the kinds of challenges that startups face. And so that's why we decided to go with you, even though some of our investors were against it. And you won't believe it, one of the investors was from Kleiner Perkins, but prior to being in Kleiner Perkins, he had been the chief operating officer at Sun Microsystems, which obviously, as you know, doesn't exist today. And so he had never been in a startup. So what would happen was, when we were in this board meeting, a lot of times later on, the company would present their plan, and then, next quarter they're behind plan, and so they would come, and this board member would ask all kinds of questions. Why did you do this? What happened? This. And the CEO would always turn to me and say, hey, Pramod, can you explain to him what a startup, how startups function, what happens, and so on and so forth. So having startup experience is very important, even as a board member, an investor, and an entrepreneur. Having operating skills and so on are very, very essential. And that, we see that even today.
So Pramod, in closing, I want to tell you something, and then we'll close this. But I think I worked with a lot of investors directly and indirectly with lots of companies. The only time an investor told the company when you were negotiating, hey, you founders should get your own attorney. And I was like, what does that mean? And after that, I have wished that any of the VCs I work with give that advice to their portfolio companies, but nobody has. So I always remember that advice. I tell all the entrepreneurs I work with saying, hey, company is different than you and is different than investors. And this is the lesson I learned from Pramod, and it was probably the best lesson. I always keep it with me. So thank you.
Wow, what a session it was.